Hi, friends. What if you woke up this morning and found the gas station closed, no milk at the store, your online order delayed, and ambulances driving 20 miles just to find fuel? What would you think? You'd probably assume a disaster just hit, maybe a war, maybe a massive accident, but the truth is, no sudden catastrophe happened at all. This crisis was created slowly, quietly, on paper, and that's exactly why most people never saw it coming. Trucking is the backbone of America's economy, and especially California, because nearly 40% of all shipping containers entering this country pass through this one state, which means the food you eat, the gasoline you pump, the medicines that reach your home, all of it heavily depends on California. And now imagine what happens when truck drivers slowly begin to disappear from that system. This story begins in 2019 when California passed a law called Assembly Bill 5 or AB 5. The government said this law was meant to protect workers from exploitation, and on the surface, that sounds reasonable. But let's understand how it works in the real world, because across America, there are thousands of truck drivers who are not company employees. They own their own trucks, they choose their own jobs, they decide when and where they work. They're called owner operators, and for them, freedom matters more than money. But AB5 introduced something called the ABC test, and one part of that test became poison for the trucking industry because it says that if you perform work that is part of a company's core business, then you are not independent, you are an employee. Now, think about this: what is a trucking company's core business? Moving freight, and that's exactly what a truck driver does. So, under this law, the driver automatically stops being independent. The message was simple: either become a company employee or stop working in California. And that's where the fracture began because most drivers didn't want to become employees. They didn't want to lose their independence. So they started leaving California. Some moved to Texas, some to Arizona, and some simply said they would no longer haul California freight at all. And this started even before the law was fully enforced because businesses fear uncertainty. When no one knows what tomorrow's rules will be, they stop investing today. The California Trucking Association fought this law in court for 4.5 years. But in 2024, they gave up, and this wasn't just a legal loss, it was a signal that the system itself was about to break. The question was never whether workers deserve protection. The real question was whether you can redesign an entire system without understanding how it actually works on the ground. And that answer begins to unfold from here because the real impact was only just beginning. Friends, sometimes I honestly wonder if you're upset with us. A lot of people watch these videos but don't like, comment, or subscribe, and that's your choice. But if you find value here, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments. Let's keep going. Now, you might be thinking, okay, some truck drivers left, but how does that affect the entire country? And that right there is the biggest misunderstanding because truck drivers are not just a job category, they are the veins of the supply chain. And when those veins are cut, the whole body slowly goes numb. After AB5, it's estimated that nearly 70,000 independent truck drivers were affected in California. Some left the state, some stopped working, and some refused to take California loads. Major companies like Landstar advised drivers to avoid California if possible, and the result was containers piling up at ports. But that was only the beginning, because at the same time, the government introduced another rule that after 2024, only zero-emission drayage trucks could be registered, meaning diesel trucks were effectively pushed out. On paper, this sounds environmentally friendly, but the reality is that an electric truck costs 3 to 4 times more than a diesel one. Small owner operators simply can't afford that. The government promised subsidies, but the paperwork is so slow and complicated that most people give up halfway. The result is fewer trucks on the road, and now the impact is no longer limited to California. 33% of Arizona's gasoline comes through California pipelines. 88% of Nevada's fuel comes the same way, which means when California's supply chain stumbles, the entire western United States feels it. Refineries started shutting down, companies began leaving the state, and now you're seeing why gas prices are rising and goods are getting more expensive. But there's another layer here that matters deeply, and that's politics, especially the role of Donald Trump. During his time in office, Trump repeatedly pushed law and order and tough policies. He treated dissent like an enemy, whether it was immigrants, truck drivers, or protesters in cities. His language created a culture where harshness was seen as strength, and when that message flows from the top, institutions below stop seeing people as humans. Trump never asked what these policies would actually do on the ground. For him, politics was a television show, and that culture disconnected policy from real life. The question isn't whether the environment matters. The question is whether change will be forced by crushing people in the process. Friends, this video isn't long for no reason. The truth I'm showing you is something mainstream media almost never explains. Watch it fully, only then does the full picture become clear. Now we reach the final part of this story where all the threads come together. Today, in many small California towns, gas stations are already closed, fire trucks and ambulances are driving 15 to 20 miles just to refuel, school bus routes are being changed, store shelves are stocked late, and ordinary families are paying more every single month. And still, the government says everything is under control. But if everything is under control, why are drivers leaving? Why are refineries closing? And why are companies fleeing the state? This crisis didn't come from war or a natural disaster. It came from laws, lawsuits, and political stubbornness. Trump's brand of politics reinforced the idea that government should be above questioning and that criticism equals disloyalty. But democracy survives on questions. If truck drivers are the target today, someone else will be tomorrow. If the supply chain is breaking now, hospitals and schools will feel it next. And that's the most terrifying part because it won't happen overnight, it will happen slowly, and by the time people wake up, it will be too late. America's strength is not in its weapons, it's in its systems. And when systems are run on fear, ego, and television politics, they rot from the inside. Today, this story is about California. Tomorrow, it could be the entire country. And the real question is not who is to blame. The real question is whether we will ask these questions in time or only when answers no longer matter. But pause for a moment because this story stops being just about California right here. This is where it becomes America's story. And this is where the most frightening question emerges. If California stumbles, how long can America stand? Because California isn't a small state, it's the gateway for nearly 40% of everything entering this country, which means if you're drinking milk in New York, filling gas in Texas, or buying groceries in Nevada, there's a strong chance it passed through California first. Now imagine over 70,000 truck drivers exiting the system at once, some angry, some forced, some afraid. What happens next is a slow collapse of the supply chain, not a single explosion, but a daily poison. First delays increase, then freight costs rise, then prices rise, and finally the average person asks why everything suddenly became so expensive, without ever being told that laws like AB5 had already set that price years earlier. And here another contradiction appears. The government claims it's protecting workers, but the workers who wanted to own their labor were forced into employment. And when they refused, they were pushed out. And as an American, I have to ask, is freedom now something the government grants or something people are allowed to choose? And then another bomb drops in January 2024. California ruled that only zero-emission trucks could be registered, pushing diesel out entirely. Again, it sounds green, but in reality, an electric truck costs 3 to 4 times more. A driver already broken by AB5 is now told to buy $1 million vehicle or quit, and that's why companies are telling drivers to leave California and refuse its freight, because legal uncertainty is a death sentence for any industry. Governor Newsom calls this worker protection, while workers are fleeing, and Donald Trump, who claims to stand for working people, either stays silent or turns it into a campaign talking point because when he had power, he never built real protections for gig workers either. This hypocrisy defines American politics today. Speeches on one side, destruction on the ground, and when trucks stop moving, the country stops moving. 33% of Arizona's fuel and 88% of Nevada's fuel flows through California, and if that slows, the next crisis won't just be inflation, it will be an energy crisis, and then the question won't be whether AB5 was right or wrong. The question will be whether this could have been stopped. I have to ask, and as we reach the very end of this story, I want to ask you something simple. If a system allows people to work happily, own their work, control their time, and the government suddenly says, no, you are now an employee, is that system built for humans or to control them? Because that's exactly what AB5 did. It labeled freedom as disorder and control as safety. And when the California Trucking Association finally gave up after 4.5 years of legal battle in August 2024, it wasn't just one case that was lost, it was the belief that courts would eventually recognize reality. And when the Supreme Court refused to even hear the case, it became clear that this fight would no longer be fought in courtrooms but in people's wallets, because in 2025 alone, the Port of Los Angeles processed 10 million containers, and if even a fraction of that supply stalls, the entire country feels it. And this is where Trump's criticism becomes unavoidable, because he looks for slogans instead of solutions, whether it's healthcare, infrastructure, or worker protections. And when it's time for real policy, there's either silence or social media outrage. And in the middle of it all, ordinary drivers, shop owners, and consumers get crushed. And the truly frightening part is that as we move toward 2026, this crisis won't stay confined to California, because when one state becomes a model, others copy it without understanding their own realities, and America will find itself trapped between freedom to work and chains of regulation. And if we don't ask questions now, don't try to understand now, we'll spend the future asking why everything became so expensive, so unstable, and so fragile, and no leader will answer, because the answers are being buried today. But as a host and as a citizen, I want to say this clearly: this is not a story about trucks. This is the story of a country that was once defined by opportunity and is now watching its people run from fear of rules. And if America truly wants to be great, it must decide whether it trusts its workers or suspects them, because countries are not run by laws, they are run by people, and when people break, even the strongest laws become useless. Thank you.